In episode 9, Karen Benson writes about a tiny New World insect once more valuable than silver. This scale insect is used to create a vivid red dye used to color everything from military uniforms to red lipstick. You can find that insect right here in Texas. We hope you will go searching for it on some prickly pear near you. Enjoy the podcast.
Our parks and pastures are beginning to get some nice wildflower color. There are red, blue, yellow and gold flowers everywhere, and I've seen Wasatch daisies. Some of these plants make wonderful dyes, for example, fringed puccoon. Fringed puccoon is a dark green, low-growing spring wildflower with several clear yellow flowers held up in a sort of bouquet. Each flower has ruffled, frilly edges. Hence the name fringed, although I think frilly puccoon would be a better choice. What does puccoon mean? The name is derived from the Powhatan word pawcone. It was their word for a plant that yields a dye. Puccoon is a source of the red dye used by northern Native Americans to give color to their pottery and baskets. Occasionally, it was used as body paint, and the woody taproots were gathered and boiled to produce a dye bath. This dye yielded an orange, red, or even purple color. Such bright colors must have been a welcome change from the everyday browns and other drab colors. However, puccoon's southern and coastal forms don't make the rich red dye of the northern types. Our puccoon more often makes a yellow. Fortunately, a much better red dye was available from Texas down into Central America. For centuries, the Maya and the Aztecs used cochineal to dye cotton. This dye was as valuable as silver. Each of the 11 cities conquered by Moctezuma had to pay a yearly tribute of 2,000 decorated cotton blankets and 40 bags of cochineal. The rich reds and maroons in the Aztec blankets caught the eye of Cortés when he invaded Mexico in 1518. It wasn't long before the Spaniards began exporting tons of the insects that made this dye. Initially, it was used all over Europe as lipstick, rouge, and eye makeup. The traditional European fabric dyes were madder root, kermes, and Tyrian purple. These substances would dye wool various shades of red and purple. This wool was reserved for the clothing of kings, nobles, and the clergy. Once it was discovered that wool absorbed the cochineal dye even better than cotton, the Spaniards increased its production in Mexico. By the end of the 1500s, as much as 500,000 pounds of the insects were shipped yearly to Europe. Cochineal is a tiny scale insect similar to a mealybug. It feeds on prickly pear. Colonies of these insects can be found on the prickly pear pads. The colonies are made up of immobile females and their larvae. The females attach to the cactus with their mouthparts and stay put. The larvae crawl about the pads, secreting waxy white filaments. When the larvae arrive at the edge of a cactus pad, the breeze catches their filaments, and the larvae are carried to a new cactus pad. Only adult males can fly. Their job is to move around and inseminate the females. The ratio of female insects to male insects is 200 to 1. This is a good thing if you want to make cochineal dye. The females' bodies contain about 20% carminic acid, and this is the chemical that produces the carmine red color. Carminic acid tastes bad and thus deters predators from feeding on the bugs. When the insects are ripe, at about 3 months old, the labor-intensive harvest of the dye stuff begins. The delicate, juicy bodies of the females must be taken off the cacti with a soft brush. Traditionally, the Aztecs used a deer's tail to brush females into a basket. The insects were then sun-dried to preserve them. Each insect formed a tiny, silvery granule about the size of a sesame seed. It takes around 70,000 insects to make a pound. For over 3 centuries, Mexico was the only producer of cochineal. Mexico's trading partners, Spain and Portugal, maintained a worldwide monopoly on trade in the dye. The British imported large quantities of this dye for their garment industry. For instance, the red coats of the British soldiers were dyed using cochineal. Unsurprisingly, the British tried to get their own source of the dye stuff. In 1788, they collected several cochineal-infested cacti from South America and delivered them to their new colony in Australia. This attempt to start a new dye industry failed. It failed in 2 ways. First, the imported cochineal insects died off, and worse, the cacti didn't. Prickly pear cactus overran 100,000 square miles of Australia before being brought under control in the 1920s. Meanwhile, the cochineal industry suffered a severe blow when synthetic dyes were invented. The delicate manual labor of the insect gathering process was no match for fast and cheap chemical dye production. Within a few years, the natural dye industry almost ceased. Recently, many of the commercial synthetic dyes were found to be carcinogenic and could no longer be used in food or cosmetics. Natural colorants were reinvestigated, and cochineal emerged as a superb and safe red dye. Cochineal colors the famous Italian drink, Campari, and other alcoholic beverages. It is found in cookies, desserts, juice beverages, jams, meat products, cheddar cheeses, and many red-colored candies. Several modern cosmetics contain cochineal. You might be surprised that we have the historic cochineal insect in Texas. My husband was skeptical. To prove to him that I could find some, we drove along back roads looking for patches of prickly pear. On one of the clumps, I pointed to a white fuzzy mass on the shady side of a pad. "There's some," I said. "No way. That's a fungus," he said. I plucked the cottony mass from the cactus and squeezed it on his wrist. Instantly, his skin was stained bright red. "Wow," was all he said. Don't take our word for it, though. Go driving where you see prickly pear and find some cochineal for yourself.
If you like these podcasts, please consider following us. Your interest and support are what make these segments possible. To learn more about Wild Texas, visit our website at www.reflectionstexas.com. Thank you.